We have a business to run today. Now, thank you everyone for joining us on the show this morning. And we are live from our Abuja studio here in the capital city of Nigeria. Today we will be discussing the ongoing crisis within Nigeria's Labour Party. The party, which initially seems as a beacon of hope for many Nigerians, is now facing internal strife that threatens its unity and future. The Labour Party has been immersed in factionalism, leadership disputes, and accusations of corruption. The Labour Party in Nigeria has faced significant challenges and internal crisis, particularly highlighted by legal disputes and factional conflicts. Recently, a court ruling allowed a case involving leadership disputes within the party to proceed, indicating ongoing tensions. The party's prominence surged during the 2023 general elections, but it has struggled to maintain a cohesive identity and unity since then. The crisis began when party members disagreed along the lines of leadership appointments, policy direction, personal interest, amongst others. The division has since escalated, with two factions now claiming legitimate leadership.
The National Working Committee of the Labour Party has accused some of its members of attempting to hijack the party for personal gain. In contrast, the opposing faction argues that the current leadership has strayed from the party's founding principles. Analysts believe the crisis could have far-reaching implications, especially as the nation approaches the 2027 general elections. Many supporters are calling for swift resolution to prevent the party from losing credibility. As it stands, the Labour Party remains deeply divided, both factions vowing to pursue legal action to assert their claims. Whether these disputes can be resolved amicably remains to be seen. And to discuss further on the crisis destabilizing the ship of the Labour Party is the national youth leader of the Labour Party, Kennedy Ahanotsu. He joins us via Zoom. Kennedy, Mr. Ken, can you hear us? Kennedy, can you hear us? All right, we'll come back to Mr. Kennedy when we are able to establish contact with him.
I think he's there now.
All right. Esho, what do you think about this crisis within the Labour Party? You know, they emerged as this alternative political force, you know, in the 2023 general election. A lot of people saw, you know, expected a lot from them, but now it seems like their house is on fire.
I think it's surprising, actually, but you will expect it, because even before that 2023 election, they had this rift. You had the party leadership not in support of their presidential candidate. You had some people even criticizing their presidential candidate. So you will expect that even after the election, such a crisis will persist. But the surprising thing also is that it's not just about Labour Party. The PDP also is not holding its ground. And you're not talking about the entire the opposition structure in Nigerian politics. They're not holding their grounds. And you have a major election just around the corner.
When you now see these oppositions not able to pull their house in order, but they are still, you know, holding high spirits that they are going to be able to snatch the seat in 2027. I wanted to see how they are going to be able to pull that off if they are having so much crisis. But even the APC seems to have a little bit of its crisis, but it's able to manage that. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, even the ruling party in a number of states, like in Benue State, there is conflict in Benue State, I think between the governor, the former governor, and the SGF. There's this conflict, and in some other states like that, they have those conflicts. But you see, conflicts, it's akin to political parties. It's your ability to look at it as an internal affairs and be able to manage it so it will spill over and begin to affect your structure. That is the major issue in here.
Well, it's interesting to see how these political parties, you know, are able to manage their crises, and especially when they have an election ahead of them. But this 2027, what are your thoughts generally? Do you think that it's going to be an interesting election? I know in the 2023 election there was a lot of tension. People don't really know what to expect, you know, but coming 2027, it seems like it's going to be an interesting era. What do you think?
Yeah, in 2023, you already had a solid party. Okay, APC was in power for 8 years, and ahead of that time, you also had the opposition party pulling their weight. But you see, the problem now is that towards 2027, you seem not to know the structures that are in place. Because you don't just win election by just talking. There are political structures you must put in place. In all the local government, in all the wards, you must have your structure in place. So you now ask, these parties that have not been able to put their houses together, the Labour Party, the PDP, what structures do they have? Because
and that was one major factor that was coming up, especially for the Labour Party. Do they have that structure? But they seem to have that positive spirit that they can whip something up before, you know, the next general election. The appeal for the fact that they were not able to win that election has, you know, given them some sort of false hope that, you know, they were entitled to that seat. What do you think about that?
Yeah, especially if you consider the weights they pulled in Lagos State. When I think before the presidential election, the Labour Party kind of won in Lagos State and in some other key states, so it gave them that hope. But we were expecting that after the 2023 election, you ought to have a retrospect and build on your capacity. And apart from even building on your capacity, you ought to pose a very solid opposition to the ruling party, because you see, the truth is in here. The citizens will look at the ruling party, their performance, will judge their performance. I will also look at the opposition parties and the alternatives they are providing. So if the ruling party is pushing out its policies and trying to make things work, and the opposition party is not putting its house together to create an alternative, then there's going to be a problem along the line. I think that is what we...
Let's check with our guest, if we have him now. Mr. Kennedy, are you online? Can you hear us? All right. We're still waiting for connection from Mr. Kennedy, but looking at the other parties and, you know, the general talks of a possible merger or an alliance, if these parties are able to put aside their differences and come together, do you think they have what it takes to unseat the APC?
TJSU, I've covered elections since 1999, and I've come to realize that you don't just win an election by wishing. If you want to go alone, if you want an alliance, it must be a solid one. Because and if you look at the history of Nigeria, even before, I think the Second Republic, political alliance never won any election until APC came out with a merger. And it was the merger that gave them that victory. So if about less than 2 years to an election, your merger has not worked, you've not been able to pull the merger through. So the question now is, are you going individually in 2027 as Labour Party, as PDP, as SDP, as NNPP? Now, if you go like that, then you're splitting your votes, then you're giving the ruling party an advantage.
All right. And since we're not able to establish contact with our guest, the national youth leader, we have with us in the studio another guest, and he joins us live in the studio now.
Good morning.
Good morning to you too. Speaking of the crisis in the Labour Party and, you know, other crises that we've seen in other political parties, what do you have to say about, you know, 2027, the road to 2027, and also considering the ruling party? Do you think that these opposition parties have what it takes to, you know, unseat the APC?
Thank you very much. The crack emerging within the opposition parties is not, you know, putting them on a better pedestal for 2027. I truly believe that the Labour Party, the crisis within the Labour Party, and even within the PDP, like what we are saying, is not really helping their cause, so to speak. And we're also hearing that there might be, you know, people working behind the scenes to get these political parties together in order to work towards 2027.
Okay. Now, as a citizen, you definitely are a participant in all this process. What are the things you expect them to do? I'm talking about the opposition parties now, because you don't just wish into an election year. You prepare the ground. Are you comfortable the way the oppositions are working?
It's the same point I made earlier. It's the Labour, not just the Labour Party, as we said, but also other opposition. We're also hearing that there might be behind-the-scenes talks with the NNDP and other political parties. It's for them to come together and form some kind of strong alliance in order to upset the ruling party. But that seems like an uphill task because we're seeing the crack within the Labour Party itself. The PDP is unable to get its house together. The crisis in places like Rivers State. All of this does not really help their cause. And towards 2027, although people are saying you still have enough time, next year we are going to see more permutations, whether it's within the Labour Party itself, the fact that, the crisis is still there. And we don't have some kind of opposition to upset the current ruling party, in my opinion.
We saw the rise of a very prominent movement in the 2023 general election, the obedient movement. A lot of people had a lot to say about the temperament of that group, how they were not disposed to any other opinion from other supporters. What do you have to say, looking at this kind of group and how they can also manage, their temperament in another election to, see that, okay, if they even stand a chance to, achieve their aim or their goal?
Yes, with the obedient movement, people say, well, the obedient movement is a completely different bloc from the Labour Party. And the fact that you have this very, some would say radical, in their approach, but it's very formidable and they are very active, particularly on social media. It's made up mostly of youth. And I don't really think that the Labour Party itself, would be able to mount any serious opposition. But the obedient movement is very strong. And if Peter Obi, for instance, decides to move to another political party, they are willing to follow him anywhere he goes. And, but the obedient movement itself does not really have the foundation or the support base, I would say, to mount any serious opposition to the current ruling party. And again, it goes back to the point I made earlier. If the opposition wants to upset the current government, they will have to get themselves together to form, some kind of understanding or alliance, just like what we saw, in the lead up to the emergence of Muhammadu Buhari, during the election.
And this getting together is it's like almost impossible, because if you take a critical look at PDP, for instance, within the PDP, there are strong forces fighting the PDP. So they've not been able to come together. You have the Minister of Works, you have the Governor of Bauchi, you have Atiku there. So they're all singing different tones. If you go to the Labour Party, the present structure recognized by the courts, the Abure faction, are not in tandem with Peter Obi. And so if you have this sharp division within those parties, how can they ever come forward to present? So if you say Peter Obi should, if he moves to another party, what happened in Labour when he moved? Is it not possible also it will happen that the structure he will meet, they will start fighting him again?
Exactly. There's this saying that although some will say it's disparaging that there are so many chiefs but few Indians. In any case, within the PDP, you have so many leaders, and all of them have very strong characters. So you're seeing this infighting going on within the PDP. So just going back to the point you made, if Peter Obi decides to now, move his structure, particularly the obedient movement, to form some kind of alliance with, or to move into the PDP, if you like, he's going to meet the same characters there. So nothing is really going to change, in my opinion. It's about people making compromises, because you have Atiku Abubakar, that we are hearing also wants to come back. Peter Obi is there. You have the fighting between the minister, the stand-up between the minister of the FCT and the governor of Rivers State. So all of this, with these characters and individuals within the PDP, and the fact that the Labour Party itself, is cracking, goes back to the point I made earlier. They need to get themselves together, before the end of this year. In fact,
we'll come back to you.
Come back to you. We have a guest still waiting on the line, Mr. Kennedy. Kennedy, can you hear us? Kennedy.
So, Kennedy, if you can hear us, let's just go this way. You're the national youth leader of the Labour Party. Tell us, what is the state of affairs in your party? You have two factions. So you belong to the Abure faction, I guess, and there's the Peter Obi faction. So what is happening towards 2027? Tell us.
All right, let's talk about the current APC government. It has come up with reforms and, policies that seem to have imposed some harsh impact on Nigerians. But the government still remains positive and has appealed to Nigerians to, calm their minds, and they will soon begin to see the benefits of these policies and reform. As a Nigerian, what is your pulse?
Yes, I have been making, consultations, and I've been talking to young people, across board, going to university campuses, and I ask them questions, people across the board. If you ask the market women, if you ask, ordinary people, some of them can understand that these reforms are needed. Mm. But it's the pain, it's the hardship, it's the untold, it's the naked hardship that is, is reflecting on not just on the economy, but on everyday life. That is, people can't live with it at this moment. But in my opinion, these reforms are needed, and on the long run, it will come off good. So but for now, it's really biting across, the
Would you say that the government is getting it right in terms of the implementation?
I wouldn't say that, that the government is getting it completely right. But this idea that, everything is useless and that we must all, stand up and say, oh, this is not good and that is not good. One thing I understand is criticism is very easy, but I would argue that the government needs to do more, particularly when it comes to, the ordinary people, the students. People cannot afford, 3 square meals, or people cannot even afford 2 square meals a day. So the government needs to put some, I would argue, some palliatives in place, or put some things in place to ameliorate the pain and suffering. But these reforms are needed, in my opinion. Okay,
now you said the reforms are needed. Now, shouldn't the youth begin to push out a narrative? Because it's like a lot of times the youth sit back and they allow the political class to push a narrative to them. With the tax reform, for instance, is it not possible the youth begin to ask their leaders, their governors, their geopolitical zones, and say, what investment are you putting in place? For instance, people say, okay, this tax reform is meant to benefit a particular state, meant to benefit Lagos above others. But the question is, if, for instance, in the north you produce agricultural produce, you produce rice and all that, why is it that you don't have a mill and be able to process what you have so that you can add value to whatever raw materials you have? I think that's a narrative that you should begin to push out and ask their leaders, what value are you adding to the primary production you have? So
thank you very much. If the young people are asking questions, we won't be in this position in the first place. Exactly. There's this theory of elites that said, the higher you go, the narrower it becomes, meaning that you have a group of elites that are pushing the narrative. And largely, the populace hardly ask any question. They just sit back and allow their leaders to decide. So with this tax reform bill, I'm not sure many of these, even some of these elites have seen or read through it or seen the details of it. And I also urge most Nigerians to take a look at some of these, these reforms. And it would be of benefit to Nigerians, in my opinion. And instead of just allowing the elites or our leaders to push the narrative around it, it's important for us to take a look at it. It's also very important. I'm not even saying that the reform, will be the silver bullet that will solve all the problems, but it is important for us to take a look at it and decide whether or not, it's the way forward, instead of just waiting on, leaders to sit down and say, oh, well, we are not going to accept this. And all of this is still part of, the politicking going on, and, and what is happening in the lead up to the next election, in my opinion.
Well, we must thank you very much for your time with us on the program, Kizito, and we hope to, see opposite side from the youths in the coming 2027 election. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, what are your final thoughts, Shomomo?
Yeah, my own
the
final,
criticisms, the drama, everything that plays out.
Yeah, I think the youth should take over the narrative. Now, the narrative should be, okay, lawmakers, we need serious electoral reforms ahead of 2027. Stop pushing this narrative you're pushing out. We need reforms.
Of course.
Electoral. And
of course.
Exactly.